What's up guys, Caruso here. Today I'm going to be showing you 10 advanced mini ramp tricks that anyone could learn. So this is part 3 in a series that I've been doing on my channel where I teach you how to skate mini ramp from easiest to hardest. And today we're going to be going over the advanced tricks. If you haven't seen the first 2 videos in this series, definitely check those out first and then come back to this one. Alright guys, trick number 1 on our list is going to be the backside Smith stall. Okay, so for the backside Smith stall, you're going to come up just like you would for the backside axle stall. But instead of locking your wheels on like this, you want to get your whole truck onto the coping, right? And that just makes for a better lock-in with the Smith grind. If you tend to get one wheel on, sometimes you don't get on top of the ramp and it just feels a little awkward. So get used to getting that whole truck up onto the coping. And then one trick I like to use when I'm locking into this is putting my heel down on the coping. So if you do this, it kind of gives you a pivot point and a place to relax and balance before you go and come back in. Now this doesn't look that great, and eventually you want to be able to just balance it by using your front toe, kind of like pointing your foot out and leaning on the back and then coming in. But in the beginning, I highly recommend doing this way. It'll just make it a lot more easy to come back in and to get into it. Wow. All right guys, next up is trick number 2, the frontside 5-0. Okay, so a lot of people have trouble with frontside stalls on mini ramps, and I think that's because when you get into a frontside stall, your whole truck is on the coping, and it requires you to do almost like an ollie or a little hop into the ramp, right? And when you do it backside, you can lock in with these 2 wheels, you know, not the whole truck on, and kind of just turn in, right? So first, we're just gonna work on getting into it, and by doing that, I like to just practice flying out of the mini ramp, right? And then just work your way closer and closer to the coping, right? And then eventually you'll be able to lean into the ramp and press on your heel. And that's really the trick for me, is like I'm just sitting on my heel, sitting comfortably, and then I keep turning, and then as I'm about to come in, I just do a little bit of a hop to get that wheel off the coping. So when you first learn this trick, it's a lot easier to learn it on smaller coping, because on this big coping, it becomes way easier to hang up. Like when you go, if you don't do a big ollie out and you just turn, that wheel can hang up. So I definitely recommend learning it on smaller coping first. And next up for trick number 3, we have the frontside Smith stall. Okay guys, so for the front Smith, you're gonna come up just like you would for the frontside 5-0. And I like to think about it like a manual. So when I'm turning, you know, I get all the way up on top of the coping and I'm keeping my weight on the tail. Like I'm centered, leaning back over the tail. And if anything, I'm almost getting into a 5-0, right? And then you're gonna point your toe down and get that front truck down below the coping. So the frontside Smith is different than the backside Smith because you can't rest your heel on the coping, right? So you have to be leaning on your tail and then ready to just press on the tail and kind of hop in. Because if you don't, it's likely you're gonna hang up just like you would with the 5-0. All right guys, that brings us to trick number 4, the frontside feeble stall. All right, so the frontside feeble can be a pretty awkward trick to learn on the mini ramp. I recommend just coming up like you would for a frontside 50-50 and just kind of get into it straight. Like don't try to be sideways at first. You know, just try to miss your truck on the 50-50 and then come in like that a few times. Then once you start feeling comfortable, you're gonna want to lock in on one wheel and keep the board sideways. When you do this, you have to make sure you're leaning all the way back and just kind of poking your front foot forward and just using your toes to almost keep it where it needs to be. Now, when you come in from this trick, you have to really make sure that you press on the tail, make sure your foot's completely on the board when you go to come back in, because there's something about a frontside like kick turn or coming in where your foot just wants to come off the board. This actually happened to me last week and I got pitched to the flat, so definitely make sure you got your feet nice, completely on the board, and you press on the tail all the way to come back in. So another technique I like to think about when I'm doing this trick is I like to open up my shoulders and like look into the ramp, just because I know my board's gonna follow where my shoulders go. And with this trick, it's just pretty difficult to come back in. Board almost wants to turn the other way and just makes it hard to come in. So I highly recommend opening up your shoulders and looking into the ramp. Okay, so for trick number 5, we have the tail stall revert. Okay guys, so the tail stall revert to me is a really important trick to learn, because it kind of opens the doors to frontside pivot to fakie and backside pivot to fakie. Like, it doesn't really look like it, but when you get into that tail stall and start turning your shoulders, right? And then you're learning how to slide your wheels on the ramp and come back into fakie. It's kind of setting you up for tricks like 5-0 to fakie. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do is, as you're coming up the ramp, start turning your shoulders backside. A good way to learn it at first is just to put your wheels down on the ramp about halfway, and then kind of use that pressure on the front to slide the wheels around. Now really, when you're doing this trick, you're supposed to be like pivoting on the wheels like that, right? But to me, it's a lot easier to practice it at first, to put your wheels down and then almost do a power slide. And all the same techniques apply to the frontside revert. I think you should learn backside and frontside. It'll just help with being comfortable on your board. So after you get your tail stall reverts down, next up is trick number 6, the frontside tail stall. Okay, so for the frontside tail stall, I like to swing my shoulders as I'm coming up the ramp. That helps me get that full 180 and be able to get into the tail stall. And then when I go to pop, it's not like a big frontside ollie and then smacking the tail down. The way I do it is it's a very quick scrape and slap it into the coping. Now, if you're trying to do a full 180 and the board's getting away from you, you can try to think about it like you're just getting in part of the tail, and then once you put your weight down, it'll like finish the rotation and lock you into a tail stall. You know, so you don't have to do that full frontside 180 perfectly into a tail. You can kind of just scrape it real fast, get it in, and it'll finish out once you press on the tail. And after that, you're just gonna press down the front wheels and lean forward. All right, guys, next up is trick number 7, backside disaster. All right, guys, so for the backside disaster, you're gonna come up just like you would for a backside kick turn. You just think about it the same way, where you're just gonna be over rotating the kick turn, like over the coping, and then you're just gonna finish out your turn and land on the deck. I like to think about it where I'm sliding my wheels, but with coping like this, you're gonna have to put more power into it, because when it sticks out, your wheels might hit it. But as long as you think about sliding your wheels, getting over, you should be able to come back in. I would say keep your feet spread apart when you're doing it. That way it's just easier to have one foot on the nose and one foot on the tail. What? First try, oh yeah. Okay, so the next trick on our list is gonna be trick number 8, the backside tail stall. Okay guys, so for this trick, you're gonna approach it just like you would for the backside disaster, but instead of sliding your wheels on the ramp to get the rotation, you're gonna have to pop the tail. So instead of doing like a full backside 180 ollie into a tail stall, I like to think about it as like scraping my tail really fast backside. You know, so you can practice this on flat, where you're just kind of doing a half 180 and scraping your tail until you get that motion down. And then once you do, kind of just come up at a little bit of an angle and then do that tail scrape and then get into the back tail. Also with this trick, if you keep your foot a little bit lower when you're doing that scrape, it'll help the 180 go around a little easier. All right, once you got the backside tail down, next up is trick number 9, pivot to fakie. Okay guys, so pivot to fakie is a trick that a lot of people have trouble doing. You know, it's because you're up on the coping and coming back into fakie, pressing on the tail. It's a lot, you know, it's very easy to hang up doing that trick. But if you get into the backside 5-0, which you should already be able to do, once you press on your toe, that's gonna be the start of you coming out of this trick, right? You pressing on your toe, you're almost rewinding the motion of you coming into it. Right, so you're going up, 5-0, toe, back in, right? And once you press on the toe, it starts taking that other wheel off the coping and bringing it in. So there's really not much more to this trick than just pressing on your tail. As long as you're completely pressing on your tail, your weight coming back down is like, no matter what, gonna come in. And as long as you keep holding it, you won't hang up, right? It's just that fear of committing to that at first. That's the scary part. A lot of the times what happens is you're going to come in, you'll finally work up the courage to stick it, and then once you finally hold it and come in, you'll press down and then slip out in towards the ramp. So it's really just, you're gonna have to work over the fear, but just make sure once you get into it and you come in, that you press on the tail as long as you can and lean all the way back into the ramp. To me, I think it's better to be leaning in that way than in towards the ramp. All right, guys, that brings us to the last trick on our list, which is trick number 10, the blunt fakie. Okay, so blunt fakie is one of the coolest looking tricks. It's also one of the hardest tricks to get used to coming back in from. But first thing I would say is when you're coming up the ramp, if you're having trouble getting into it, practice flying out of the ramp first. Just keep doing that, then practice doing manuals out of the ramp, you know, and then hitting your tail, and then eventually you'll be able to just stall up on top of the ramp. Now, when I first started doing blunt fakies, I would get in just like this and stay all the way up on the ramp, wait a second, like get my balance, and then pop in. And a lot of the times, I would come back in, land, and then slip into the ramp, getting a huge bruise on my hip. But nowadays, I do it more as one motion, where I come up, press on the tail. The second I get in, I use that momentum to start my ollie out, right? So it's like an in and out kind of motion, and then I come back in. One tip I have for coming back in is I've seen people do it where they do it like a manual, and they almost press on the tail, just like the pivot fakie, and manual it back in. I've never done it that way. I usually do it in one motion. It's a lot of impact when you go to come back in. Like, it's very easy to slip out. So maybe you should practice a bunch of ollies to fakie first, just to get used to being in the air and then landing back in that way. And if you're really having trouble coming back in, you can try popping it in and taking your back foot off, just like as a brace. You know, make sure you don't shoot it into your ankle though, kind of keep it to the side. Just get one foot on it, just so you can know you can pop it in. All right guys, hope this series was helpful for you. If you're new to this channel, check out some of my other videos. And if you have any skateboarding related questions, just leave them in the comments below. All right, thanks for watching.